Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here, finally, with my King Kong review. I'm sorry this has taken me so long to get to. I've been busy the last couple days. It's been tough to focus and tough to find time to sit down and film. But here we are, well into Giant Ape-ril. But I finished the first book, which is this novelization of King Kong that was written by Delos W. Lovelace in 1932, before the movie even came out. A lot of people have been reading this. So I'm sure a lot of people have seen, all kinds of information on this. Roy's video was really good, going over all the various adaptations of King Kong. I'll link that in the description. So I just took some notes, so I'm just going to kind of talk about my feelings on it. The main thing that intrigued me about the book is that it's mostly very faithful to the movie, barring, some differing lines and some extended scenes. There's a lot more dialogue in the book than there is in the movie, which I think works out better in the film because it's more streamlined. But in the book, there's a lot more sort of explaining things that are going on and like going through the plans that all the characters go through in detail. Some interesting differences, one that a few people have already talked about, including Roy. The ship is named the Wanderer instead of the Venture. Carl Denham is just Denham for some reason. I don't know why, but yeah, nobody ever refers to him by his first name throughout the entire book. They just call him Denham. But yeah, as I said, for the most part, it's pretty faithful to the movie. Sometimes its faithfulness to the movie is a bit eerie, considering that it came out like before the movie was even released. For example, the scene where they talk with the natives on the island for the first time is almost word for word in the book as it appears in the film, down to like the made-up language of the natives. It's almost the exact same, which is really, really interesting. One of the things that I was also hoping that they would include, that they did include, is the famous spider pit sequence, or maybe I should say the infamous spider pit sequence, which is surprisingly gruesome in the book, talking about bodies falling to the floor and either dying or going unconscious, and bones crunching and things. It's really horrible, and there's like multiple spiders described and all these different creatures. It's really, really, really cool. One of the other things that I noticed that I thought was kind of interesting was that the crewmate Jimmy is never even named in the movie, but in this book he gets a little bit of like development, sort of like the young hotshot, sort of excitable young kid, ends up carrying the smoke bombs at one point, and dies along with the rest of the crew when they all get flung into the pit. But what was interesting about that was that Jimmy has a huge expanded role in the remake, and it made me wonder, because in the original movie, Jimmy is not even referred to by name. He's just part of the faceless crew. None of the crew really get developed beyond like the cook and the main characters. So it made me wonder if Peter Jackson was familiar with the novel. I assume he was, because he's a massive fan of this thing. A few other sort of interesting little differences between the book and the film. In the book, Anne and Jack Driscoll kind of just fall in love right away, almost. Whereas in the movie, they move the explanation of his feelings to after their first meeting with the natives when they're back on the boat, which I think actually worked better in the film, because then it gives it a little bit more development, and we see them both go through a little bit, with this, adventure with the natives, where he's like worried for Anne because the natives want to take her and all this stuff. So I think that works a little bit better in that context. And it also ties back into, because throughout the beginning of the film, he expresses all this frustration about having a woman on the ship, and their conversation on the ship after the natives, where he admits his feelings for her, ties into that a little bit better. It's still obviously a very rushed romance, but the romance was never the central aspect of the book anyway, or of the story anyway, so it doesn't really matter. One thing that I thought was really strange was that for the most part, the dinosaurs in the book are almost never explicitly named. They're just described. Like, if you know what a T-Rex is, it describes a T-Rex very, like, much in detail, but it never refers to it as a T-Rex. It just calls it a meat eater. And the same thing with the Brontosaurus. It just describes it as this thing with a long neck, But it does name some dinosaurs. Like, it mentions the Triceratops, and it mentions the pterodactyl by name, but none of the other dinosaurs, as far as I remember, are ever explicitly named in the book, which I thought was interesting. It made me wonder, like, were audiences like thought to be familiar with the dinosaurs enough that they didn't have to say what they were, or was the author worried about being too exact, like he didn't want to put a name on it because then it would he would have felt more beholden to being more accurate with how they're supposed to be presented, you know what I mean? I don't know. But looking up Delos W. Lovelace, he was a New York newspaperman. I don't think he wrote that many novels. but it makes it interesting because I feel like you can tell that he took a lot of pleasure in the New York exhibition scene when they bring Kong back to New York. There's this whole sequence where he describes all of the various people that are showing up from all different parts of the city and how they're all kind of interacting with each other. And he really seems to have a sense of, like, the different boroughs of New York and the different neighborhoods, and how they all talk and sound. And there's lots of description of the various newspapermen who show up to take photos of Kong. And there's lots of description of how they're all kind of like jockeying for the best angle to get a photo of Kong, and talking about, ways that they can sort of spin the story and, in their article and things like that. I assume that all came out of his experience as a newspaperman, and it's one of the times where the detail in the novel is much more explicit. See, one of the other things that I found interesting was that in the book, a lot of the actual, like, physical descriptions and stuff are a little bit vague. He doesn't really go into a lot of detail with the actual description of Skull Island, or Skull Mountain Island, as they refer to it in the book. But once you get to the New York scenes, I assume because it's a real place that he's more familiar with, he really goes into it, and it made it really interesting. Although, as a sort of a flip side to that, the whole entire New York scene itself is considerably shorter. There isn't any mention. There's no mention of the train scene where Kong, like, destroys the train and, like, kills all the people inside of it. They don't have the scene where Kong grabs the wrong woman out of the window and drops her. It doesn't mention him eating any pedestrians. It's crazy because it's this big, spectacular scene at the end of the movie, this crazy bit of destruction, through New York City, through this iconic place. Aside from, The Lost World, it's one of the first really big sort of city destruction scenes in the movies, and it's not anywhere to be seen in the book, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, there's just a lot of, like, little differences that were very interesting and unexpected in the book. I think it's a fun little adventure tale, especially if you're familiar with the movie. I think you'd get more out of it. But in a lot of ways, I think the movie is actually better for some of the aforementioned reasons, like how they streamlined some of the dialogue. They have a lot more action in New York, and a lot of scenes in that are really iconic. But at the same time, it also has a lot of the scenes that are very famous, such as the fight between Kong and the T-Rex, which is pretty much exactly as it appears in the film, including all down to him cracking the jaw and then playing with it afterward. So yeah, it's a really interesting little description of the film. I don't know if I would say it's essential, but it's a fun little adventure piece, and I wonder what people thought about it, before the movie came out. I wonder what people thought reading this, and wondering, like, what's this King Kong movie going to be like, It's always interesting to think about how people sort of parsed things in their head before we had these, like, big pop cultural things to draw from, from the popular consciousness, you know what I mean? One thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to just the story of King Kong, and this is credit to Roy. I never would have thought about this on my own, but one of the things that I find really interesting about Kong is that it's a spectacle about spectacle. Carl Denham is kind of the analog to Ernest Cooper and Marion Shudsack, the directors and conceivers of Kong, who were very much adventurous types, and they're all about showmanship and stuff, and that's kind of reflected through the character of Carl Denham, who's similar in that he's a very go-getter, hotshot director type, and his sort of a character arc throughout the movie is learning kind of the error of his ways of letting his hubris get to him. Becoming so caught up in the spectacle of presenting this thing that nobody's ever seen and being the first to ever do it, and making all this money. It's almost like a commentary on the foibles of of letting your greed and your obsession with spectacle getting in the way of your empathy and your humanity. So yeah, credit to Roy for that. I really that was an angle of the book and of the just the overall King Kong story that I'd never really thought about. It's a very short book. It's only 212 pages, but it's the King Kong story, a little bit different but interesting, with some intriguing differences and some little details that I didn't expect. It made me rewatch the movie again to compare it, which I really enjoyed. I love the King Kong movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it countless times. I really do think the movie was one of the first really big sort of Hollywood blockbuster spectacle kind of things, because of at least of the sound era, because of course In the silent era, you had things like Kabiria, you had the Lost World, but King Kong was really the first spectacle of the sound era, where it was all about adventure and action and excitement. And it's really kind of been the blueprint for that type of movie all the way up to now, to the Marvel films even. So it's just really fascinating, and this was an interesting sort of a historical footnote in the development of King Kong. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and I hope you guys found this interesting. Sorry, I took all these notes and I thought I'd kind of have a lot more to say, but it is a very simple book. But I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to try and read the Godzilla novelization next, although with how things are going, we'll see if I'm able to get through it. But yeah, that's really all I had to say, and I hope you guys enjoyed and found it interesting. I hope you're all enjoying celebrating Giant April with me and everyone else. So yeah, until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye.